Greetings, denizens of the Empire. It's Jabara here. Many of you may have noticed the official drop of the Woman King trailer a few days ago, an upcoming film based on the pre-colonial West African kingdom of Dahomey. Overall, there seems to be some kind of mixed reviews on it. I'm personally excited about it, and I'll definitely be watching it regardless, as it's really the only unapologetically pre-colonial African content that I've ever seen come out of Hollywood. Today though, we're simply going to break down the trailer, what's authentic and what's not, and my general opinions and concerns alike on it as a whole. So first, we're going to discuss the authenticity of the film based on what was shown in the trailer. The clothing worn by the female warriors doesn't really require much comment. I can simply say that I think it's pretty accurate based on historical photos and drawings that I've seen of the Dahomey Kingdom. I was pleasantly surprised to also see authentic swords represented in the trailer, a traditional one-handed single-edged saber which Tafon people refer to as hui. The shields shown, however, are not what one would have expected to see in the Kingdom of Dahomey. These shields are known by many names, including the glagwa or the tlokwo, depending on the respective people who use them. They were made by the Wandala and used by them as well as their neighbors, all of which reside in what is now modern-day Cameroon. Finding actual images of Dahomey shields proved difficult, as the Kingdom of Dahomey primarily relied on firearms throughout their military history. However, I was able to find this sole image of male warriors carrying a shield which had a long and ovoid shape, loosely resembling those used by the Zulu. So when looking at the architecture, honestly the first thing I want to point out is a structure built by Europeans. I'm not entirely sure which castle this is, but the architecture resembles that of the many castles that dot the coast of the modern day country of Ghana. Elmina Castle and Cape Coast Castle being two prominent examples, and while the Kingdom of Dahomey existed in what is now Benin, this would be a relatively small nitpick, and I would imagine that Ghana would be a much more inviting country for American filmmakers, for a multitude of reasons. Upon looking at the interior architecture of this Dahomey Palace, I have to say it's incredibly difficult to find any images of the interior designs of African structures, and when I do end up coming across them, they are usually just rural, rundown huts or just poorly maintained due to modern low economic status of the countries in which they are located. Or they're just largely replaced with modern materials like concrete cinder block walls and corrugated iron rooftops. Needless to say, that leaves much to be desired as far as appearances are concerned. In any regard, I do see parallels between this interior image from the trailer and the exterior architecture of the actual royal palaces of Abomey that still exist today in the modern day country of Benin. The square wall murals and their animal designs, their quadrangular elements, and their use of plastered adobe brick bear a true testament to this. It's also important to note that these alcoves in the interior are common in the architecture of pre-colonial Benin, Yoruba, and the Ashanti kingdoms as well, and were at times used for seating, storage, and even cooling by water channels that ran underneath them. All in all, I can't really say that I'm unimpressed with the authenticity of the props and sets, but I do have some worries and concerns. Many people have the erroneous belief that modern rural villages of Africa are an example of what one would expect in the whole of Africa prior to European influence. With that being said, I was worried that they'd just film on some rural village full of huts in some random part of Africa, which would not really be the best example of the urban landscape of this pre-colonial African civilization, much less its royal structures. That would be like using the hovels of some medieval peasants' village as an example of what a medieval city would look like or where the king would reside. We all know that's just false. Fortunately, based on what I'm seeing in the trailer, however, that shouldn't be a concern, hopefully. I do have other concerns, however, but before we cover those, I just want to briefly shout out Happy Hippo Herbals for making this video possible. Happy Hippo Herbals is a provider of numerous alternative medicine products, some of which I use regularly to help me stay focused and feel less anxious in my daily life. You can receive not a 15%, but now a 20% discount on all Happy Hippo Herbals products using my promo code FN10. Go to fromnothing.info/market for a direct link to their website and other brands that I've worked with in the past. So the trailer in and of itself doesn't really give me too many concerns. However, one concern that I do have is at 52 seconds when Niska and King Gezo are having a discussion, and he seems absolutely dumbfounded by her question about leading her people into war.
Niska, you are asking me to take them to war.
Some things are worth fighting for.
His reaction makes it seem as though it's just some absolutely senseless, alien, and reckless assertion, which literally makes no sense to me. The Dahomey Empire, as with all other empires of world history, was built from the ground up by war. The Dahomey Empire's entire existence was wrapped in a continuous state of war, so it doesn't really make much sense that a king of an empire like that would react with such disbelief at the idea of war. Another concern I'm having is kind of an iffy one. I'm kind of noticing a trend. Of the 3 mainstream movies of the past years that were based on African kingdoms, all of them kind of perpetuated this whole strong black woman trope. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with having strong female characters. In fact, it's kinda a good thing, as men have been overrepresented in most films as the most dominant and important characters throughout the history of cinema. My issue with this, however, is that it's a recurring theme in this new and blossoming industry of African media. Not just women being strong and influential characters or assuming leadership roles, that's totally fine, but literally assuming roles that warrant physical strength and fighting skill. Something that favors men from a biological standpoint. All 3 of these films that came out in recent years are based on actual African female warriors, so I can't really say too much. The Woman King and Black Panther are both based on the Ahosi, sometimes referred to as the Dahomey Amazons, and Amina is based on, well, Amina, a 16th century Hausa princess war general from the Kingdom of Zazao. In general, I just don't think that manly or physically strong women should be the dominant theme in African-themed media. I don't want this to become the basis of this genre of films. Additionally, I think it just kind of gives off the impression that black women have to be manly to be notable characters in this nascent realm of cinema. That part right there is obviously just my personal opinion. I know there are plenty of people who will welcome this whole idea with open arms, but I just don't think that should be the standard when it comes to African-themed films. And by far, one of the biggest concerns I have with this trailer is the disproportionately large amount of dislikes. And upon looking at the comments, most of the hate is coming from the condemnation of Hollywood glorifying a kingdom that is known for its role in slavery. By no way at all am I justifying Dahomey's place or involvement in slavery. What confuses me, however, is how it's totally fine to make a movie about the Romans, the Spanish explorers, or British, even though they practiced slavery and all manner of human atrocity on a much larger scale. In fact, the whole reason why countries like Jamaica and Cuba exist to begin with, and why they are mostly populated by people of African descent, is because the Spanish and British opened sugarcane plantations there and forced African slaves to cultivate their crops.
But the British ended the slave trade, but the Dahomey Kingdom wanted to keep it around.
It's tough for most people to ignore bias in these situations because everybody has some sort of agenda, especially when it comes to race. Yes, the British established the blockade of Africa, and yes, they were the primary players in the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade. But you simply cannot ignore the several centuries that the British and all other Western European powers not only partook in the slave trade, but shifted the entire economy and political stability in the entire West African region in favor of this slave trade. The unfortunate reality is that bad people come in all colors, especially when money is involved, and the slave trade was no different. This movie is based on a nation fighting for its independence from a European power, right? Well, our first American president who led our country's war of independence not only did so while the states actively participated in the slave trade, but even owned slaves himself. What does he get? Dislike bots on every single video about him? Nope, he gets his face immortalized on our money. Oh, and the double standards, they don't end there either. In fact, the word slave derives from the Slavs, a group of related tribes in which all Slavic peoples descend from. Slavery has been present in Europe throughout most of its history, including back in ancient Rome. The tribes of pre-Roman Europe themselves practiced slavery and human sacrifice, and to this day, some of their victims have been mummified in peat bogs, some still having ropes tied around them that can be visible in museums to this day. The Aztec and Maya are praised despite practicing both slavery and human sacrifice. All of the accomplishments and cultural feats of these civilizations are openly celebrated by most. However, when it comes to Africa, the sheer emphasis on practices of slavery, human sacrifice, and generally negative topics are a direct result of Europeans looking for excuses to colonize them or civilize them, all the while stealing and exploiting their lands, and despite their own roles in the exacerbation of the slave trade in West Africa and the general instability that followed. Long story short, slavery and human sacrifice have been a recurring theme in all parts of the world, so the prominent focus on this fact to the point of dislike-botting the video seems to indicate that the backlash is stemming from other motives. Motives that have their roots in colonial viewpoints, and some other viewpoints that I'm sure you can guess. Even in my own videos, when I speak highly on any African civilization in any category, I'm usually immediately met with comments downplaying these achievements, and a few comments condemning the entire civilization and everything that has ever achieved wholly because of its practice of slavery or human sacrifice, despite its prevalence in many other civilizations like ancient Rome and the Aztec Empire that are just celebrated nonetheless. And lastly, I just wish this film didn't continue the theme of black oppression by foreigners. It's time for a new narrative. Let's tell a story about Africa, unapologetically set in Africa and having an African cast, plot, and theme in its own right. Let's have African protagonists and African antagonists. Let's stop the narrative of black victims fighting against the white man. It doesn't have to be some fight against white oppression to be a good story. But that is a relatively small nitpick because all in all, I'm just happy that the plot of the film seems to be the defense of a kingdom's independence rather than the typical narrative of escaping racism in a Western society, or any of the other overly saturated victim themes in most primarily black casted movies. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I'd love to hear your opinions on this trailer as well. Are you excited to see it, and what are your worries and concerns? Let me know down below, and don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. For sources, check out my website, linked below. If you'd like to support future projects, you can do so there as well, or by clicking the join button below, or by becoming a patron. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching as usual, and always remember, we don't come from nothing.